Hello, and welcome to my presentation for MI 339 Assignment 1. I am Jonathan Skidmore, and this will be a video discussing White Knight Chronicles in the context of culture and gender stereotypes. First, to give a bit of context, White Knight Chronicles is a Japanese RPG game, which is a role-playing game, and it takes place in a fairly stereotypical fantasy setting. The gameplay is fairly similar to most Final Fantasy games, in that it is a real-time combat sim game, but involves a lot of strategic choosing of actions. However, what I'll be analyzing will be more focusing on the characters and story elements. The characters of White Knight Chronicles at first glance appear to fit neatly into character archetypes. For example, the main character, Leonard, is a sort of hero from a humble background with a heart of gold, who falls in love with the princess and tries to get her back. And then there's the old man mentor figure, Eldor, and the princess is fairly stereotypical at first, and they all just kind of fit neatly into archetypes at the beginning, but some of them do change over time, and I'll be analyzing that later. The story of White Knight Chronicles would take too long to explain here, but the general idea of it is the beginning, the bad guys, the Magi, run by General Dragius, at least at first, kill the king, kidnap the princess. The main character finds some magical suits of armor under the castle and gets some magic powers, kills the bad guys, but fails to rescue the princess. And then the characters go after the princess again, kill the bad guys, princess again gets captured again anyways, and that cycle continues. The characters change throughout the story, but the story doesn't, and the more complicated understory isn't really worth analyzing here. Now I'm going to analyze two of the characters of the game, because I think they make a good example of a character who is very deeply entrenched in gender norms and cultural stereotypes, and a character who kind of breaks them in interesting ways in the game to kind of show that this game can do both, and it does it in ways that I haven't seen in other games before. So Leonard, the main character, as I've said before, very much fits into the archetype. His story starts off as if he were the main character of a coming-of-age story, except for his character doesn't ever change. He's kind of a teenager with humble beginnings who falls in love with the princess at first sight, gets some magic powers and uses them to solve pretty much every problem for the rest of the game. Got a run-of-the-mill heart of gold, cares too much, and is also kind of in a, at least in the first game, sloppily executed love triangle, and overall is just kind of a very stereotypical, very standard protagonist. So the next character I'm going to provide as a counterexample to how this game conforms to gender stereotypes is Kara. And Kara is an interesting character because she at some points is sexualized and at other points is a strong female character, and throughout all of it she's taking a fair amount of agency in the story, driving it forward, and also at the same time is pretending to be a protagonist but is really an antagonist, but then becomes a protagonist. It's very complex. There are spoilers, but I think it's worth it for the analysis. She starts off in the story, the first time you see Kara, she is wearing the armor of General Dragius, the guy who killed the king, and fights the party, and then escapes. And then she tries to use her looks to get close to Leonard, to assassinate him, and when that fails, joins the party to try again, essentially, but ends up becoming romantically entangled with another character, and that then leads to her not wanting to betray the party, betraying the party anyways, and then later dying to save the party, essentially, which kind of leaves the overall impression of her it seems like the developers were playing with gender ideas with the character in both good and bad ways, but it's undeniable that she is definitely not a stereotypical character as Leonard was. So, after analyzing some of the characters and looking at a brief overview of the story, where does that leave us with this game? I think at the end of the day, it's a game which pretty shamelessly follows the Save the Princess storyline, and the princess and the characters trying to save the princess are very predictable and stereotypical, both from a gender perspective and from their adherence to that storyline. But there is complexity to it that happens sort of on the side of that main storyline, and it does subvert character arcs and character genders in interesting ways, and portrays some different female characters in different ways, which kind of highlights the complexity of the issue. So I'm unclear if it's all because of differences in cultural ideas about gender in Japan where the game was made, or if the developers were intentionally playing with these ideas. But I think it's likely that they knew what they were doing, and that a lot of their decisions for these characters were made intentionally in order to highlight the complexities of the issue. It is, however, worth mentioning that the villains in the game tend to be more well-developed and interesting as characters than the main protagonists, especially Leonard. And that is also interesting to analyze, but I think it's, at the end of the day, it does its best. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this presentation.